Hi, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. It's another week. It's Take the Lead, Change the Game, a podcast for women leaders looking to deepen their knowledge and skills and find enjoyment in the process. We're powered by Safra Leadership. Safra Leadership is a cohort-based coaching experience designed to fuel courage and ignite impact among women professionals. I'm Lindsay Gray, and this is Mindy Gulati. We're the co-founders of Safra. Together, we bring a blend of leadership coaching, strategy, and lived experience to help women navigate challenges, seize opportunities, and lead with confidence. Welcome back, everyone. And this week, we're going to be talking about how to solicit feedback on yourself from awkward to actionable, how to get the real thing. But first, Mindy, I want to ask you about something. So last week, we talked about grit. And you talked about your daughter and how you have seen her exemplify grit because she has been on a volleyball team that had generally not had a very successful season. And they were having their last game that night. And I want to hear about how it went.
Yeah. And I asked you all to cheer her on. And the big news, drum roll, they actually won. And they have never even won a set. And they won their first set. I think it was 26-24. They won their second set, 25-16. Carmen scored the last point. She served, and it was like so incredible because you would have thought we won like the championship of everything. And what was really cute was that like all the parents were, basically crying. Kids were crying. And the parents on the other team were like, why are you all like erupting in this? And one of our parents went over and said, like, they've never won, like not even one set. And then that parent was like, oh, good. Like, we're good. We're happy you all won. Like, it was just like a really sweet community feeling. But yeah, so the grit paid off. And that will carry them. They have playoffs this week or next week. Not sure how they'll do, but they are coming off with a lot of like a pride in themselves. So awesome. So thank you all for sending Carmen your thoughts.
Yay, congratulations, Carmen.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's turn now to soliciting feedback. So Mindy, tell me, how do you generally feel about the amount and quality of feedback you see people get in the workplace? You spend a lot of time in law firms and corporations, like helping with this. What do you see? How do you see it going generally?
Yeah, so I feel like I spend a lot of my work life talking about feedback and how to give better feedback. I would say I'm going to sort of bucket things into law firms versus companies. In companies, there's a lot of emphasis on giving feedback. However, I don't think the feedback's very good. So there may be some quantity of feedback, but it's mostly like, hey, good job. And that's sort of the extent. Or an end of the year review where you go through everything, which end of the year reviews are hard when you haven't gotten any feedback the rest of the year. But I think companies put more of a focus on let's give some feedback. I work with a lot of companies where I bring in more of a comprehensive approach to it, high performing teams approach, and then we give a lot more feedback. Law firms, people get like no feedback. I mean, I survey associates, partners. I just surveyed some partners and they said they've never gotten feedback in their entire year from their like counterparts. Like only feedback they've got is like from a judge. And typically that's not great feedback. It's like harsh and I don't know how valuable it is because it's usually, criticism without actions behind it. So I think that this question is so important because people who excel, I think, seek out feedback. And it's not always going to be readily available. I mean, that's my perspective. I've worked with about 120 odd companies, varying degrees of good feedback, but most of them I would say need improvement. I don't think I've worked with a company where it's like, y'all do fantastic. It's mostly needs improvement. And for all of us trying to become leaders and grow, you're not going to, none of us are that self-aware to know everything that we need to work on. So that's why we want to talk about this today, is because if the purpose of these podcasts, the purpose of the work Lindsay and I do is to help people level up and go to the next level and excel, you have to get feedback on yourself. And it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, for sure. I see a lot of avoidance, right? I mean, we see a lot of avoidance in organizations where someone is underperforming in a certain area and people like kind of wait. They're like, oh, it's not a big enough deal right now. I don't need to talk to them. And it's like the next time it happens, the person's slightly more resentful or upset. It's like then the next time and the next time. And then they're talking to third parties about it, potentially like multiple third parties about it without addressing it with this person. And then every time like there's actual feedback, it's an event as opposed to this like normalized loop. And so, and that does a lot of things to people's nervous systems, right? Like if you're always on guard, like waiting for the shoe to drop, as opposed to like, I sort of have a sense of what's going on and what your feelings are and what's working and not working all the time, consistently. And I think we can position ourselves well by soliciting that feedback from others, because it like you said, Mindy, it helps us elevate ourselves in terms of leveling up, but then it also puts us in a position to give feedback from a place of like, this is normal. Like we're all just trying to get better, for sure.
Yeah. And, we're not talking today about how to give feedback. And that's another leadership discussion, but I do in asking for feedback, you actually do learn, when you go ask and you start receiving it, it helps you refine your skills in giving feedback. So to make it a part of the everyday. That's why I think when I look at companies that spend a lot of time and money and effort on, year-end reviews and sort of these metrics, what they're missing is the day-to-day feedback and teaching people to ask for day-to-day feedback. Because people get scared. And again, like one thing I want to add to all of this is like everybody comes to the workplace with their own lived experience. And so there are a lot of people who get no feedback in their childhood, in their teenage years, in their college years. They're just like, you're special and you're awesome and go get it. And that's important on one lens, but they don't know how to go ask for the negative. They get scared. And so they know they've messed up. So they're like, oh, let's just not talk about this. But that doesn't help you grow. And like I said, no one has that much self-awareness to know all the things in which they kind of need some improvement on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that came up yesterday, as you mentioned, childhood, yesterday we had our software leadership breakfast, and somehow we got on the track of like kids sports. And one of the things that has sort of evolved in kids sports is there is not a ton of feedback loop about how a kid is doing in sports until they're like trying to go to college and they're understanding sort of where they fall. And I think that sets many of us up, right? If we go throughout our lives without feedback, we either like never receive it. And so there's like huge areas of growth, or we end up feeling like we got punched in the face, the first time that we start receiving feedback. And so soliciting it helps us be better. It helps our relationships, all of the things. So what are some other things, Mindy, that we heard at the breakfast that you thought were useful and helpful and meaningful?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because we're sitting around the table and Lindsay, you brought up, let's talk about how to solicit feedback. And like everyone sort of laughed. It was very awkward because people don't know how to do this. They don't do it. We had a mix of lawyers and non-lawyers at our breakfast, but the lawyers were like, yeah, we don't get feedback. What I also thought was interesting is I brought up something to one of the lawyers, and I can't remember exactly how I said it, but I was like, do you ask your clients for feedback? Do you ask your opposing counsel for feedback? And it's like, no. And that's one thing that like, as Lindsay and I were public defenders, it's a brutal world to be, you get a lot of critical feedback, you get a lot of pushback. But what I often did with my clients was just ask them like, how did I sound? Like, how do you think I did from the client's perspective?
Yeah.
A lot of times we're only concerned with our manager's feedback too. But I liked getting feedback from, the client, from the judge. I would actually go and ask like the bailiff. I made friends with all the bailiffs and I'd be like, how did I do? What do you think? Like, and they would be real honest. Sometimes they'd be like, you talk too fast, or you rolled your eyes, or I thought you were really great and you convinced me. And so it's, what I thought was interesting yesterday was when we asked, it was like people kind of laughed uncomfortably.
Yeah.
And I think that shows that this is not something that people do. It's not something people know how to do. And and I think we just think about it in terms of like manager or boss giving us feedback or parent, but you got to think about all the people around you who can give you feedback.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important also to solicit specific feedback. So like shifting now into the how to do it. And Mindy, I know you have a great, and I've heard it from something similar from Kim Scott, Radical Candor too, on how to start soliciting feedback, but I definitely think specific is helpful. So it's like you were talking about being a public defender. You just did a cross-examination. How did that sound to you? What was my tone? Did I talk too fast? Whatever those are. Or like you finish leading a workshop or a meeting and I say, turn to my co-presenter or to someone who was there and say, hey, how do you think that went? And even say like, I felt like it might have been a little rushed at X point or whatever. Like, did you feel that? Like those kinds of things, the more specific you can get, the more helpful it can be. And also like people then will respond as opposed to like, got any feedback? Most people are going to be like, no.
Definitely don't ask like, how do you think I did? Like, because they don't know if they can trust to give you, and then that's part of it is like, you need to, I think part of the thing of soliciting feedback is you have to tell the person like, you have to build that trust ahead of time and you have to say like, I am ready for this. Because when I get asked to give people feedback, I do a lot of coaching. I will say like, do you really want to hear what I have to say? Like, truly, are you like, you genuinely want to hear it? Because it's not going to be, I'm not going to hold back. I'm not going to be mean or brutal with it, but like, do you want to know? And I always start with that sort of like, do you want to know? But so I think you have to ask specifically. One way that you can do this, I mean, there's a million ways, but one thing that I teach in all the leadership workshops I do, and I've done them with lawyers, and it's an experience, I'll tell you that. And I've done it at companies, is this method called start, stop, and continue. And so what I do in a workshop is I have people pair up with someone that they work a lot with. And the question is, what do you want me to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing? And you sort of have a dialogue. And, if you and I were doing this, Lindsay, I would say, Lindsay, what do you want me to start doing, stop doing, continue doing? And the conversations are incredible. And that's one way. You can just go to people around you. What do you want me to start, stop, and continue doing? Also, what I think is interesting for lawyers is when we do this activity, I mean, it is awkward. I will tell you, like, everyone's like, what? Yeah. And I give them more time than I give in like corporate settings. So instead of giving them like 3 minutes each, I sometimes will give 5 minutes each because it takes them like a minute or two to even be ready to like, but once they do, oh my gosh, this feedback is so specific. I mean, I'll like listen, and it's so specific. Like, and sometimes it's these things that are, the reason I'm saying awareness is like a lot of times I'll hear on the stop. So if I say, hey, Lindsay, what do you want me to stop doing? A lot of what is communicated is stop doubting yourself. You're really good at this. Yeah. And I think that's so valuable to hear that from a colleague and from somebody. So that's one way that's pretty easy that you can get feedback, and then it allows you to give the other person feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
How about you?
Yeah. In terms of what specifically?
In terms of asking for feedback, like how do you get specific feedback from someone?
Yeah, I mean, I think I tend to really try to make it super specific. I do love the idea of like, what can I start doing, stop doing, and continue doing to make it easier to work with me, and certainly try to make space for that. And I think the trust building is so critical, especially when you're soliciting. It's a good way to ask it, but it's more general, right? Like in the sphere of working together, like what are the things? I also really like asking for very specific feedback, like reaching out to folks after the breakfast, for example, and saying, hey, how did you feel? What'd you like? What was your favorite part? Like, do you have any suggestions for what we could do differently? And to be candid, like something that happened yesterday was that we didn't get to our to talking about like the topic until an hour, you know, like after the start time. And so, you know, and it's a tough balance because you have people coming in, sort of trickling in, but then you don't want the people that have been there since almost the start to feel like, oh, we're not on topic, and
Yeah.
you balance like formal versus informal. And so trying to get a pulse on that is really important. And
Yeah.
that's an example of, I had several conversations yesterday about that particular topic, and hearing how people are feeling is so helpful for us as we, you
Yeah.
know, do these leadership things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that I want to talk about, you know, Mindy, you had mentioned, I think you mentioned a moment ago, 360 reviews. And, you know, what what we mean by 360 reviews is not just your manager, you know, or if you are a manager, not just the manager giving the feedback from the manager, right? A
Yeah.
360 review should be holistic. So the manager, whether that's you or your supervisor, should be soliciting feedback from your colleagues, you know, anyone that you manage,
Mhm.
potentially clients in a perfect world, like really understanding, you know, holistically
Mhm.
360, who are all your stakeholders, and then
Yeah.
sort of compiling and delivering that feedback, as opposed to just be like, well, I as the manager perceive
Yeah.
YZ thing. And those are that 360 review is super important. One of the offerings that I have just started offering in my coaching business is something called a Leadership Compass 360. And it's a really holistic sort of look of like, what are your values? Where are you headed? And developing an action plan. But a critical piece of that is interviewing people in your life. And that includes people like your spouse or your best friend or your mom, right? To sort of
Mhm.
see like, what are the narratives that you're telling yourself that like maybe you're not going to tell me in a one-on-one, or maybe you're not going to write down in a self-assessment, and
Yeah.
like what are the things that make you unique and special and a badass, and what are the things that are holding you back, because
Mhm.
oftentimes those people can articulate them better than you can, and it's great also just to have that
Yeah.
feedback.
I love that. And I especially love, you know, and in, you know, companies do 360s, but I love the lens you bring of like asking friends and family, because I think they highly influence our career, but they also know us the best, and they know what we bring home. And, you know, one of the things that it's interesting, because a piece of feedback that my 13-year-old gave me in the spring was, he said, "Mom, you're just too intense. Like, you're so serious all the time."
Yeah.
And at first I was a little defensive, like, well, do you know who I am? Do you know what I do? Like, of course I'm intense. But I took it as like, well, that means probably work is coming too much to my home, and I
Yeah.
got to create a barrier. And so, or a boundary.
Yeah.
And that was direct, you know, feedback direct. And I took it initially like, oh,
Yeah.
kill me.
Tigers.
The teenager's right, you know,
Yeah.
but it was like, oh, that, but what I'm saying is, like, if you were to interview my son, you would be able to coach me better, because he would say, hey, my mom comes home and she's still in this work zone and she's still intense. And part of like my goal in my life is not to have that intensity at home when
Yeah.
I'm chilling
Yeah.
with the kids.
Yep.
So I love that approach. On the topic of defensiveness, do you have any thoughts about what to do if you get defensive with feedback?
Ooh, I mean, so there's a couple of things. I think if we feel, and I absolutely get this way, like someone's giving me a piece of critical feedback, especially something like that where you're like, oh, I work so hard, like not to bring work, like to have a different work life, and it's sort of like a dagger. I feel myself, like my heart starts increasing, my
Mhm.
palms get sweaty, like, you know, and certainly in the professional realm, when a colleague or someone is telling me, I think it's okay if you are self-aware enough in the moment. I think it's okay to hit the pause button, right? And or
Mhm.
like not, I would listen, but then like if you need a moment before you can help clarify and reflect with them, I
Mhm.
think it's okay to say, "Wow, that hit me really hard. Like this is really important and I want to can I noodle on this and can we regroup tomorrow?" Or whatever it is.
Yeah.
If you find yourself, which we all do, in the position of saying, of like reacting in a way that you don't love once you're done, right? Whether you lash out or, get defensive. I think it's okay to still come back, the next day or the next week and say, hey, I want to regroup on this. I'm really sorry about my reaction. It hit me really hard, or whatever's authentic to you. I want to hear more because this is what I understood that you were saying. And then try in your own words to say what you think, reflect back to them what they were saying, and engage that way when you're a little bit calmer. And then the only other thing I will say is, if there is something in there, and there is sometimes where we will get feedback, right? Where we're like, oh my gosh, that's not even real. And maybe you can have a conversation, but if there is something, which most of the time there is, that we can do differently to make ourselves better, the relationship better, to act on those things. And maybe to follow up later and say, hey, I've been working really hard on this. Like, what's your reflections? Like, you want to talk again?
Yeah. Yeah. And what I'll say is I sort of have like when I give people feedback, when they come to me as the coach and want the feedback, I have them do 4 columns and that as the reflection. So you get the feedback. So, your boss says that you're always late on getting things in, or your colleague says that you're really, passive aggressive, or your child says you're too intense. What you want to do is write down what's the feedback and write it down, so that it stares you in the eye. This is after the conversation. And then write down what you felt when getting it, and be honest, defensive, sad, pissed off, this is not true. They're making this up. But then the 3rd column is the most important, which is then you have to say what about their feedback is true. There is no way you're getting this feedback and it has no basis in reality. So I did that with my son. I do that with, feedback all the time, is okay, what about this is true? What from their lens, from and then I write it down. And then that helps me figure out what actions I can take, which is the 4th column. So then you hear the feedback, you say, okay, they're right on this one. Maybe they're not right on all of it, but they're right at least on one thing. Then what can I do to change that? And so then you make a plan, you hold yourself accountable. So that's one way. I mean, when you're going to go solicit feedback, you have to be ready for it. And hopefully a lot of your feedback is really positive too.
Yeah, for sure. Mindy, what is one piece of advice or feedback that you have received throughout your career that has furthered your career?
Yeah, so I will go way back to my trial days because it's helped my whole career, which is I care a lot about people. I'm very passionate. I can be very intense per everybody around me. But I had a judge pull me in his chambers once, and I had won the trial. And he was like, you did fantastic, but you were so intense and you were relentless, and it worked for you here, but it's not going to work every time. And you really need to create some sort of energy space to not get so intense. And that was the first person who told me that. And I guess it was confusing at first because, well, don't you want, I just won. And the intensity was helpful. But what he was saying is that can't be your go-to every single time, or you're not going to win. And it was very true. And I had to that was probably the advice that I got that has stuck with me continuously, is we have to be different in different places. We have to act different in different situations. And you can't just go full, all the time. And so that was helpful. What about you?
Yeah. So it's funny that you mentioned earlier this idea of trusting yourself and your confident voice. My very first performance review, isn't it funny that we remember these very early career, right? Things that, that set us off. But my very first performance review at the public defender's office, the main piece of feedback was, you know the answer. You don't need to confirm it with us, because I wanted to be perfect. And so it was every little thing. It's oh, is it this? How does this sound? And they were like, oh my gosh, you know the answer, And so, and so that was huge for me. And then another thing that several people gave me pieces of feedback, and coaches that I had when I was at Vicina, running a nonprofit and building that from scratch, was the advice about storytelling. When you are out in the world trying to grow your organization, you're trying to raise money for your organization, get clients, what have you. I think especially in a technical field like law, we had a program where we reunited families through helping sponsors get unaccompanied immigrant children out of detention. And I would walk around and be like, we assist sponsors helping immigrant children get out of detention by petitioning. And they were like, no, you reunite families.
Yeah.
And the whole, like, what is the story? And for me, that really helped change how I approached outreach at Vicina, and certainly has helped frame, how I approach like talking about myself, which I know we've talked about on this podcast before, was a really good piece of advice.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway from today is don't be scared of feedback, and seek it out, because look, like Lindsay and I changed a lot of things that we were doing based on the feedback. If that judge never pulled me in, man, I would have went hard as could be in every trial, and I would have lost, and people's lives were on the line. And so, feedback is really healthy. It's a gift. It's hard to give people feedback. It is a gift. Not enough of us get feedback. Not enough people are willing to have that hard conversation with us. And so seek it out. We'll continue these conversations. If you're a leader, also encourage that trust between you and people, that they can come ask you for feedback. Build that. That's important.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and we will see you next week. All right.
Take care.